Good morning or good afternoon, Year Sixes, whatever time of day it is you're managing to get to your history work. We've really enjoyed learning about the Industrial Revolution and the Victorians. We've really enjoyed reading The Street Child. I'm hoping to get a copy from school so that I can finish reading that to you. But one thing we haven't looked at in much detail is workhouses. So this PowerPoint is looking at more detail at workhouses, the place where Jim and his mum was sent or ended up after she. Your task at the end of this will be to write a diary of a day in the life of a child in a workhouse, and you're going to be including who you are, what happened on that day, how you feel, what you ate in that day, details of the work that you or other children have completed, and details of a punishment you or one of the other children have been given, depending on who was misbehaving and what they were doing. Once you've finished that, I'm going to ask you to upload a picture of your work, of your diary account onto Class Dojo, or you can write directly onto Class Dojo. So grab pen and paper, pause the video if you need to while you grab a pen and paper. It's well worth making some notes around those points. First of all, what was a workhouse? A workhouse was a huge building built for very poor people to live and work. They were poor for a number of reasons: ill health, old age, single mothers, orphan children, or purely because they couldn't find work. Able-bodied, unemployed people had no choice but to enter a workhouse. The alternative was prison. So there was no other way of living. If you didn't earn money, you had to go to the workhouse to work for your food and your shelter. The history of the workhouse. The first written record of a workhouse dates back to 1652 in Exeter. The threat of life in the workhouse was meant to encourage able-bodied paupers to find work. Unfortunately, it resulted in many turning to crime. So it was a place for paupers, poor people, to go if they didn't have a job, but it wasn't meant to be pleasant, it wasn't meant to be a fun stay. Instead, really, everyone wanted them to go to work, wanted the paupers to be able to work. However, as you read in that previous slide, some of them may not have actually been able to work, may not have been their fault at all. So the word pauper means a person who has received relief, and that's money from the estate where they live. So it's disappeared slightly behind there. How do you think poor people felt about life in the workhouse? This is when you can start putting some of the emotions, some of the feelings words down ready for your diary account. Families. If the man of the house was unable to work or find a job, the whole family had to move into the workhouse. The family was then split up. Men lived and worked in one area of the workhouse, women in a different area, and the children lived in another part of the building. And we found that Jim was immediately separated from his mum in The Street Child. Very young children were allowed to stay with their mothers, but as soon as they were old enough, they had to move into the children's area. From then on, they only spent a short amount of time with their parents once a week. What do you think this did to families and family life? Again, this is an opportunity to jot down some of the ideas, think about whether or not your family lives in a different part of the poorhouse or whether you're an orphan like Jim became. Work. Work was hard in the workhouse. Gets its name from somewhere, doesn't it? The guardian made sure that inmates earned their keep. Men had to complete jobs such as breaking stones, working in the fields, grinding corn with heavy millstones, and chopping wood. Women's tasks include kitchen duties, laundry, spinning, sewing, weaving, and scrubbing floors and walls. Again, Street Child gave us the insight into the carpet beaters, one of the women's jobs, or taking in the laundry from different places. Did you know guardians ran the workhouses and made the rules? Why do you think the work was so hard? And what I said at the beginning, it wasn't to encourage people to go to the workhouse, it was to encourage people to get their own jobs and run their own homes rather than go to the workhouse. Clothing. Uniforms had to be worn in the workhouses. They were made from dark, coarse materials. The uniforms were designed to be uncomfortable. Women wore plain shift dresses with an apron. Men wore jackets, breeches, that's a type of trousers, and a striped cotton t-shirt with a cap. We found out what Jim wore in The Street Child. Did you know some workhouses even made different types of women wear different clothing? For example, unmarried pregnant women were made to wear red dresses to show what type of person they were. Why do you think some women had to wear different clothing? think sometimes they were judged or made to feel different. Food. In the 1800s, food largely consisted of bread and cheese, broth, and some meat very occasionally. Breakfast was a thin porridge called gruel. Workhouses brewed their own beer, so inmates were given watered-down beer. Sometimes, if a workhouse had its own garden, there might be potatoes at the midday meal with boiled meat. Pudding was either rice pudding or steamed suet pudding. Milk was often diluted with water, and fruit was non-existent. Why would the milk be diluted? It seems like we drink a lot of milk now, but back then it would have been much more scarce and much more expensive. Again, if you haven't done so already, pop down a couple of notes as one of the points to include on your diary entry. The meal times. What are your thoughts about this picture? Think about what it would have felt like to be eating in that place. Children. By 1909, around half of children living in workhouses were orphans. In the nurseries, one doctor noted that children had a pale and unhealthy appearance. There were 23 children, aged 2 or 3, all in one room, never to leave for air or exercise. In one recorded visit, 104 girls all slept in a huge dormitory, with them all sleeping 4 to a bed. How would you feel living in the workhouse? Again, it's an opportunity for you to jot down what the sleeping conditions might be like in the workhouse you're going to be pretending to be in. Crumpsall Workhouse. 23 boys at Crumpsall Workhouse in Manchester, around 1895. So if you work that out, it's not that long ago. 135 years ago. What are your thoughts about this photograph? Schooling. All children were expected to have 3 hours of instruction in reading, writing, arithmetic and Christian religion. In 1836, a workhouse in Bedford decided that poor children did not need to write, but would still be taught to read. Girls did not have as much education as the boys and were taught skills in sewing, knitting, domestic service, ready for employment at the age of 14. Why do you think the girls were not given as much education as the boys? We've looked a lot so far this year at inequality, and this is some of the roots of inequality, of women's education not being as important as male education. This is a child's day in a workhouse, starting at 6 a.m. Wake, make bed, pray, clean shoes and wash. At 7 a.m. gym exercises for the boys. 7:45 a.m. prayers and breakfast. 9 a.m. historical reading. 10 a.m. arithmetic. 11 a.m. grammar dictation. Dictation is when a teacher would speak and you'd need to write it down. 12 p.m. dinner. 2 p.m. writing, copy books, and girls did their needlework or knitting. 3 p.m. reading and explanation for the boys. 4 p.m. geography with maps for the boys. Looks like the girls didn't get to learn to read, to do some explanations, or learn to use a map. And 6 p.m. supper, 8 p.m. prayers again, and bedtime. Rules. It's interesting here that they've used the word inmates. Inmates were not allowed to. Inmates is usually a word used for prisoners, which, as we learned in the story Street Child, they were pretty much prisoners unless they could buy their way out or go out to work. They weren't leaving the workhouse. Anyway, so the inmates were not allowed to insult another person, swear, refuse to go to church, refuse to work, be drunk, pretend to be ill, waste anything, play cards, make a noise, be unclean, disturb others, climb a fence or boundary wall, and they weren't allowed to break anything. Pretty tough rules. Punishments. Obviously, if there's rules, there's always a punishment. Punishments for children were usually severe, despite there being an agreement that children should not be mistreated. One teacher made children get up in the middle of the night and carry a basket on their head full of clothes. If they dropped a single item, they were beaten. I'm not quite sure what the point of the exercise would be, to walk around at night with a basket full of clothes on your head, other than for a child to drop it so they could be beaten. Didn't seem like a nice teacher. Others were made to kneel on the wire that covered hot water pipes, causing awful burns and blisters. Horrible punishment. What do you think about the type of punishments? Explain your opinions. So think out what might have happened, what rules someone might have broken to get one of those punishments, and whether or not they were particularly fair or just. The end of workhouses. Life in the workhouse was harsh. Usually those who went in never left. On the 1st of April 1930, workhouses officially came to an end. The National Health Service began soon after, so everybody, rich or poor, had access to health care. Many workhouses were used for hospital buildings and care homes. There's a nice way of changing it round, going from workhouses where people were punished for not being able to work to a place where people were treated for illnesses and cared for. It's a reminder of your task. Your task is to write a diary in the day of the life of a child in a workhouse. You need to include who you are, what happened that day, anything in particular, or was it just another normal day? How you feel, and that could be feelings at different points of the day. What's the best part, the worst part? What you ate that day. The details of the work that you or other children have completed. That could be schoolwork. Details of a punishment that you or one of the other children have been given. You can share your views on that punishment too. Once you've completed, you can upload a picture of your work onto Class Dojo. If not, you can write directly onto Class Dojo, that's absolutely fine. If you wanted to make this look like an authentic diary entry, you can think about what that piece of paper looks like and what the writing script would look like. Just as long as when it's got a picture taken of it, we can read it, that'd be great. Okay, have a good day.